We'll just wait for a few more people to join, then we'll start. In the meanwhile, we can build some suspense. Pretend we're at the Esri user conference at the Queen Elizabeth Centre, the mecca of spatial data. We've been given a session on charity data, and people are flooding in here. No, I know that's not quite the case, but we can pretend, so it's fine. Yeah, it's a bit of a mind bender, isn't it? Okay, so we'll get started. So I'm James. You should be able to see my slides now. I'm a researcher and PhD student at the University of Birmingham. My work looks at how charities in the UK use spatial data. So that's what I spend most of my time doing, but I also do some research and data strategy consultancy on the side. So this is a 25-minute session, and it's going to be split into two halves. So the first half will be looking at sort of simple but effective ways of mapping postcode data, and particularly mapping it against the indices multiple deprivation, mostly because in my experience, this is sort of a core use of spatial data. We'll then have some time for questions before moving on to some slightly more advanced stuff, sort of like joining your spatial data its boundaries and the merits of different software packages and tools. So I can't cover everything, I'm afraid, but I hope you will leave inspired and with a better understanding of the tools and data sets that are available. And you can find links to nearly everything that I'll mention on my website at thirdsectorgeography.com under a blog post called Mapping Tools for Charities. Or you can just Google Mapping Tools for Charities and it should come up. I'll just set my stopwatch. Okay. So yeah, we're going to cover postcode data first, and then we'll have some time for questions on postcode data specifically before moving on to some other stuff. So by spatial data, we're mostly talking about a location attribute and adding a location attribute to other forms of data. So location can be postcodes, coordinates, administrative boundaries. So for example, if we want to map an individual village hall, then we could map it by its postcode. Or if we wanted to be a bit more sort of specific, we could map it by its latitude and longitude. Or if we wanted to see how many village halls were in Essex and then compare it against other local authorities, we could group them all under that local authority code, which is here. And we're going to see later on how we can use the Office for National Statistics spatial codes to sort of join tabular data with spatial data. So of course, we can analyze spatial data in a database, so we can just simply sort it by ward, or we can do a simple pivot table. But the idea behind visualizing the data is that from overlaying multiple layers of spatially referenced data, we then get novel or new insights when they're compiled. So each layer could be positioned using a coordinate or a postcode, or it could be linked to another layer using a common property or an identifier, such as the local authority code that we just saw. So later on, we'll be joining two layers using census output areas and using unique IDs for those areas. And geographic information systems used to be primarily sort of desktop software, but these days there's some great online web mapping tools as well that pretty much do the same thing. So why bother with spatial data? Well, there are very few things in life that are aspatial, that don't have some sort of spatial background. And learning where something happens is often critical in understanding why. And location can help us to pull together different concepts and variables to make sense of things. And we can talk about space as being sort of socially produced. And likewise, the social is often influenced by space. So we have sort of a co-constitution at play here, and studying it can be really helpful. So I'm going to demonstrate a mixture of tools that can be used to map your data. And the first one is Google My Maps. And some of these tools are free, and some of them you'll need to pay for with sort of non-profit discounts and things. So Google My Maps is completely free. It's really easy to use, and in my experience, it's completely underused because it's, well, it's just a great tool. But it's part of the Google Drive suite of tools, and you can decide whether to keep the map privately on your Google Drive or whether to share it more publicly. Or you can embed it in your website and have different layers of data you can turn on and off, as the West London Zone do. So I'm going to show you how we're going to use Google My Maps to plot postcodes and boundaries. So to start with, we just go search for Google My Maps or Google My Maps. Hopefully you can all see this. Please let me know if not. And we're just going to go to create new map. And we're going to call this one Essex Charities. I'll just flip back and make sure everyone can see that. Yeah, looks like we're good. So we're going to call this one Essex Charities, and I've got a CSV file which has got a list of some charities in Essex, and so we're going to import that file. And Google My Maps will want to know which column has the spatial data in. So in this case, it's postcode data. So we're going to click postcode. And we want the name of the charity to be the title. So we're going to click name, click finish, and it'll upload, and it will be able to tell us if there are any that it couldn't map. So let's wait for that to load. So it says there are 2 in our data table that it couldn't map. So if we click open data table, it'll then show us which 2, and we can have a look at that later on and see why that's the case. But you can immediately see that it's mapped the location of each charity based on its postcode. So if you click on the charity, it will give you then the data that's sort of in the table that sits behind it. And if you want, you can style these in really nice ways. And this is one of the great things about Google My Maps. It's really simple. So we can style it by category of charity, for example. So in here, there's 3 different categories: social services, economic, and culture and arts orgs. And say, for example, we want to see which organizations fall within which CCG boundaries. Say we engage with CCGs, and it's important for us to see which organizations to engage with. So we're going to add a spatial boundary layer of the CCGs, and to do that, we're going to click Add Layer. And the spatial data file is going to come from the Office for National Statistics Open Geography portal. Now, the Open Geography portal is a fantastic resource where you can find boundary files on pretty much any spatial area that you're interested in. So administrative boundaries, census boundaries, electoral boundaries. So in this case, we're interested in health boundaries and then clinical commissioning groups. It's also worth saying that the Open Geography portal holds the National Statistics postcode lookup, which is a database split up of multiple files where for each postcode in England and Wales, you've got the corresponding spatial code for things like electoral area, lower super output area, middle super output area, local authority. So it's a really comprehensive database of the government statistical codes in the UK. So that's really worth knowing about. So yeah, we're going to go to boundaries, health boundaries, and then clinical commissioning groups. And we're going to download it as a KML, so it stands for Keyhole Markup Language. This is the file format that Google My Maps accepts. So we're going to go import. We've got it here, saved to KML. And when it loads, it'll load it for all of England. And the really great thing about this is it's pretty lightweight, so there's very little things. So if we just turn off this top layer and zoom into Essex, we can see that there are actually sort of 5 or 6 clinical commissioning groups that we might want to engage with. And we can turn the top layer back on to see which charities fall in which area. So it's just a really nice, simple visualization of what falls where, using postcodes crucially. Now, of course, you can share this internally if you want to keep it internal, or if you want to embed it on a website or share it externally, it will look a bit like this, where people can click on the individual organizations, see the information about them, and also search within that as well. So that's Google My Maps, a really nice, easy tool. I'd recommend you have a play around with it. It's worth saying that Google My Maps accepts, I think it's 2,000 data points per layer and no more than 10 layers. So there is a limit, but it's pretty high. So the second tool that I'm going to show you for mapping postcode data is called Community Lens. Community Lens was funded by Catalyst, developed by Hetco Design, and I worked with Hetco on some earlier iterations of this. And what Community Lens does, it allows you to map postcode data against the indices of multiple deprivation. So we're going to click Use Now. I've got the postcodes from those charities that we're just looking at. I'm going to click Map Postcodes. And it will tell you if any of these postcodes can't process. So to start with, we're going to view our data against the whole of the indices multiple deprivation. If we just zoom in a bit, we can see, when it loads, we can see where each of our data points falls against the indices multiple deprivation, and each of the subdomains in here as well. And the really nice thing about this tool is it gives you a visual output on the left-hand side. So it'll tell you the majority of locations are in the top half areas of England for indices multiple deprivation, and it'll break it down by the deciles. So this is splitting all of England into 10 equal groups. So we can see that 100%, 106 of our organisations are based in areas that are in the top 10% least deprived in England. And it's really important to say that we don't fall into the fallacy of saying that people who live in these areas are the top or bottom 10% deprived in England. Instead, we say they live in. That's a really important sort of caveat to add. But we can screenshot, put and include it in funding reports, grant applications, and the key thing is it's anonymous as well. So it's a really nice, simple visual overview. And we can split this down by the individual subdomains of the indices multiple deprivation as well. So if we're interested in education, for example, crime, living environment, income, for example. And if we click download data, it will then give us back our postcodes with the rank of the indices multiple deprivation and each of the subdomains sort of attached to it as well. So it's a really nice, simple tool that's worth showing and worth having a play around with as well. And it also doesn't store your data on here. So important to note, once you close the tab, it'll lose the data. But the flip side of that is it means your data is not stored on the server anywhere. So it's pretty anonymous and secure. Now, both of these tools accept postcodes, but there are some tools that will only accept latitude or longitude. And to do that, there are some tools to help you. So one of them is David Kane's Find That Postcode. Now, if you have a CSV file with a postcode column in it, you can upload it and it will then append. So add on the latitude and longitude. It will tidy up your postcode for you. It'll add on the indices multiple deprivation rank. And a whole range of other spatial data as well. So, for example, the clinical commissioning group code. And so you'd need this sort of data to then add it to the spatial data boundary files I'm going to show you in a minute. And David's also got a great tool called Find That Charity, where if you have an organizational identifier, you can then add on a whole variety of other organizational characteristics as well. So that's worth knowing as well. And finally, before we stop for some questions very briefly, it's worth talking about OCSI's local insights. So OCSI are an organization that actually update the indices multiple deprivation. And they have this really nice online platform, which isn't free, you do have to pay for, but they give you a non-profit discount, and there's a decent free trial as well that's worth using. Now, Local Insight has hundreds of data sets preloaded that you can view your data against. And one of the great things about Local Insight is if you work in an irregular geography, so if you're a community foundation, for example, and the area that you work in isn't fairly standard, you can take a cookie cutter type tool and cut out the spatial area that you're interested in. It will give you reports for that area. So you can create custom geographies in it, which is really neat. So get in touch with OCSI if you're interested in that. So I'll just stop for a few minutes and take some. Yeah, Kate, thank you for sharing that and take some questions. So all of these tools are on my website if you're interested. Yeah, find that postcode link. So does anyone have any questions specifically on postcode data? I'll give you a few minutes to type. Is it just England and Wales? Yeah, so the indices multiple deprivation, I think, is just England and Wales. It might be just England. So Scotland and Northern Ireland have their own, and there are some historic reasons for that. But there was an interesting paper recently talking about how we can compare them. So if I can find that at some point, I'll share that on Twitter if you're interested. But yes, it is just England and Wales, unfortunately, for the indices multiple deprivation. Oh, no worries. I'm glad that was helpful. Okay, so I'll just move on to the next part of the presentation. If there are any more questions, we can pick that up afterwards. There should be 5 minutes or so for questions at the end as well. Does anyone know about any tools to quickly convert postcodes to boroughs or regions? Yeah, Ollie. So I think David Kane's. Oh, yeah. So if you're talking about London Borough, I'm not sure, Ollie, but google.co.uk is worth a look because there might be some geocoding tools in there. I'll talk about that in a minute. So we'll just move on to the next part of the session. Cam will pick your question up afterwards, if that's all right. So the next tool I'm going to talk about is Esri's ArcGIS Online. So this is as simple as Google Maps in terms of uploading layers, but it gives you lots more options visualizing data. The public account is free. However, it's important to know that you have to be able to agree to save your map publicly online on the free version. If you want to keep it private, you then have to subscribe to ArcGIS Online. Now, Esri do give a hefty non-profit discount, so if you're interested in using GIS regularly, I'd really recommend getting in touch with Esri. People have got lots of good things to say about them. So, for example, let's say we're looking at loneliness amongst over 65s in Wigan, and we want to see the charities that work there locally. We're going to use ArcGIS Online to do that. So we log into ArcGIS Online and we click Add New Layer. Now, the layer we want is going to come in the form of a shapefile. So this is just another spatial boundary format. And we're going to download it from Wigan Council's Open Data Portal. And lots of local authorities have got great open data portals that are worth looking at. So this is a lower super output area and it's loneliness amongst over 65s. So we download that and we import the layer into ArcGIS Online, and it visualizes it like this for us, with dark blue being areas where loneliness is more prevalent amongst over 65s. And we can see down the side here, it's got a whole range of nice visualization options. And this is the power of ArcGIS Online, really, is it does lots of the heavy lifting and work for you. But we're also interested in which organizations work in these areas. So again, I've got a database of charities where we've got latitude, longitude, and postcode. So we're just going to upload that. And as I said before, if you don't have the spatial data required, you can use Find That Postcode or Google, the tool I just popped in the chat, has a great batch geocoding function in there as well. So we've uploaded the individual charities and it's mapped it like this. It looks kind of like a map that's got chicken pox, but we can sort that out later if we want. And if we're interested in density, you can view it as a heat map as well, which is really cool. So let's say we zoom in on one organization in particular, we can see that it operates in an area where there's high loneliness amongst over 65s or comparatively high. So we can choose to engage with this organization if we want to support their work or partner up with them in some way. So ArcGIS Online is a really nice, simple way of mapping your data. The final tool is QGIS. It's free and open source desktop software, and it has over 550 plugins that allow you to perform different operations, including a package that allows you to turn your map into a web map. And to demonstrate QGIS, I'm going to mirror a real life example that I was involved in recently. So say we work with people from a Somali background and Birmingham City Council are moving to a neighbourhood approach to social care. And we need to decide which neighbourhoods we're going to focus our efforts in. So to do this, we're going to use the wards shapefile, so looking at the wards in Birmingham. We're going to use the census output areas shapefile, so a boundary file which shows the census areas. And we're also going to get some census data from the last census, which shows areas where there's a high percentage of people from a Somali background. So to start with, we'll get our census data. Now, the census data we're going to get from the Consumer Data Research Centre website. Again, if you haven't seen the type of stuff they do and the maps they have available, really check it out. You can spend all day playing around with the maps on here. So we're going to download country of birth data. They've got lots of data sets nicely packaged up, and this is one of them. So we download the country of birth data. And it looks like this. So on the left-hand side, we've got the output area codes. These are the statistical codes I was talking about earlier. And on the right-hand side, we've got the percentage of people from a Somali background in that output area. Now we need the boundary files. So again, we go back to the Open Geography portal. We download the wards, and we also download the census output areas as shape files. We go back to QGIS. and we add new vector layer. So we're going to first of all add the census output area boundary file. So we add that, and this is all the census output areas for England and Wales. We then add the census data on where people from a Somali background are. So that's text data, so it doesn't have any geometry. But what we can do is we can now do a spatial join where, because the two codes are the same, we can merge them. So we've gone into the census output area spatial shapefile, and we can perform a spatial join between them. And what that does, after some playing around with the visualization, is we can then start to see the areas with darker blue where there's more people from a Somali background. But this doesn't really answer which wards or neighborhoods we want to work in. So we then upload the wards file and we layer it so that we've got OpenStreetMap as the base map, the map underneath. We've then got the wards, so Harborne, Edgbaston, Ladywood. Then on top, we've now got our census output area data. So we can go beyond sort of our anecdotal understanding and a knowledge of where people are, and actually present some sort of hard evidence. And admittedly, it's from the 2011 census, which isn't great, but it's the best we've got at the moment. So we can go to Birmingham City Council and commissioners and say that we believe we're justified in working in Aston, Soho in Victoria, Nachells, and Sparkbrook in particular. And as I'm sure many of you can testify, there's something quite compelling about a visual map in the way that it brings people on board in a way that sadly sometimes just anecdotal data doesn't. So this is a really nice use of QGIS. And this is stored locally on a computer, so it's secure. But if we want to publish it online, we can use the QGIS to web plugin. And what that does is you can then publish it as either an open layers or a leaflet web map with no coding whatsoever. And it packages up your files like this, and it gives you an HTML file which displays the map in the end. And you can upload that to your own server if you want. Or what I've done, you can see this on my blog, on my website, I've put it on the Amazon Web Services bucket. So there are multiple options for publishing your maps to the web using QGIS to web. So finally, a lot of the time, a good map starts with a comment along the lines of, it would be really great if we could explore this or visualize this, and then see what data you have or need and what tools would be best. And I've come across lots of great examples where people have involved, people have collaborated with other organizations or skilled volunteers or universities to carry out discrete pieces of mapping work. And you might already have access to some great mapping tools that I haven't covered today. So somebody in your organization might have access to Tableau, which has actually got some great mapping functionality these days and is really, really powerful. Or Alteryx or Microsoft Power BI, which is slightly less powerful, but still gives a really good, easy way of visualizing your data, particularly if you already have a license for it. So Power BI is included in the Microsoft Office 365 license, for example. And you may already be holding spatial data, you don't think of it as such. So if you have postcodes, then it's there, so see what you can do with it. And finally, if you're looking to sort of really advance your use of spatial data, I'd recommend investing time and resources in QGIS, R, and Python in particular. And if you're really interested in, I recommend Robin Lovelace's Geocomputation with R. The first few chapters of that will get you started, which is fine. So I'm around for the next 20 minutes or so at the conference for questions if you want, or otherwise feel free to message me on Twitter or send me an email or something like that. So thank you. So I'll just right, so we got any specific questions? So Cam, we didn't pick your question up from earlier. What would you suggest for working with a bigger data set, circa 25,000 entries? Yeah, so nothing online for that many entries. Probably something like QGIS or ArcGIS, or if you use R, then I would start interrogating your data in R a little bit. And we find it difficult to define our county borders using postcodes alone. Is this a common issue? Do one of these tools allow us to quantify these? Yeah, so I would use for this, I'd use David Kane's add that postcode to add the county code, and then I'd go on to the ONS Open Geography portal and download the county boundary file and then merge them. That's probably the best way of doing it. James Tillicast, on Google My Maps, can you add categories of charity in your CSV file and go from there. No, so all of that sort of stuff has to be done on the CSV beforehand. So you can't really do any editing to the actual CSV on Google My Maps. You have to do it beforehand. But if it's in there as a discrete variable, then it will let you source or visualize in that way. Nicolaus, sorry if I've got that wrong. Are there any specific Python packages? So I've not done a huge amount of Python, but GeoPandas is probably pretty good. But otherwise, I've mostly done stuff with a bit of R and QGIS, I'm afraid. But yeah, beyond GeoPandas, I can't really help you with that, I'm afraid. Let's go back to the main chat. Are there any other questions? Yeah, Duncan talks about Mapbox. Mapbox is really good. I've never got to grips with Mapbox. I don't like the tile format, but different horse, of course, I guess. So see what works for you. Yeah, Mapbox would also be something I guess could hold that many data points. We got any other specific questions that I've missed? What do I think of MapInfo? To be brutally honest, it's outdated, but if it's what you've got a license for as an organization, then use it. Lots of people have to convert MapInfo files into something else, I think, to be used. Yeah, I agree on the outdated comment. Yeah, no offense if you use MapInfo, I think give it a go if you've got a license for it, and that's great. But these days, there's so many good free and open source tools. Use something like QGIS or get started with R if you can. Really recommend MapShaper. Yeah, is that for converting? Is that for converting file formats? I think it is, isn't it? It's where you drag and drop. Yeah, it is. Yeah, so if you want to move between shapefile and GeoJSON, for example, let's go back to the Q&A, see if there's anything else in there. No. So have people started mapping their data? What sort of things have you been mapping your data with? How easy do you find converting QGIS maps into web maps? Yeah, it was pretty easy. The main thing is you've got to have a server or something to host it on the end. So that neatly packaged files that I showed at the end, you've just got to have something to host that on. But yeah, it was really simple. And the guy that maintains the plugin is a bit of a hero. Lots of these people do this stuff in their own time. So yeah, really admire him. Yeah, Flourish is a good option as well. I've played around with Flourish a little bit. In response to Nicolaus's point about making the case for senior management, so lots of the people I've spoken to, they've had to develop a prototype or something like this in their own time just to show the power of it. And then once they've demonstrated it, then they get buy-in. So I agree, that's not ideal. Do I think open source map software is the way forward over desktop versions? Yeah, quite probably. And there's an interesting split in lots of organizations where they subscribe to stuff like Esri, but people on the sly use QGIS because they're advocates for open source stuff. I did it by hand for our donors, only 300 records. That's not great. Well, fair play to you for pressing on with it. I don't know what SVG is, Duncan. Maybe I've missed that, but standard vector graphics or something like that. Scalable vector graphics, close. Deprivation data for Scotland. Yeah, thank you for that. And I'll post on my Twitter account afterwards. It's not easy to find it now, but I'll post on my Twitter account afterwards the paper about comparing indices of multiple deprivation between countries. Is there something else in the Q&A? And a good 101 primer for GIS. Yeah, so Stack Exchange, the GIS sort of portal within that is a good place. Or on the link on the blog on my website, there's a link to a book called Introducing Using Spatial Data in R. Now, you don't actually have to follow through and use it in R, but at the beginning, it gives you a really good overview of the different spatial data formats and GIS language. And actually, I'm sure your background's not that outdated. These things haven't moved that quickly, so I'm sure once you start looking through it, there'll be a lot that you recognize. But yeah, I think it's by Lex Coomer and Chris Brunsden. It's called Introducing Spatial Statistics in R. But the first few chapters of that are really worth getting into as well. Thank you. I'm glad you liked the session. People love spatial. No, it's great. So we've got a couple of minutes left. But as I said, I'm around at the conference until 1. Then feel free to me on Twitter or email me or something like that. Numbers are dropping off as people go and put their beans on toast on the hob. I can just sense it. Or their beans on the hob, not the toast as well. No worries. I'm glad you liked it. Yeah, actually, having beans on toast, of course, is a work from home classic, isn't it? Called it. I did, yeah. So, Francesca, let me find that. Yeah, so this is it. So you can find it on Amazon or anything by either of these two. Or if you don't want to pay for anything, there is, so if you go on my website, it's vectorgeography.com. On there, there's a blog post called Mapping Tools for Charity, and at the bottom, there's a link to a free online open source book. And again, it focuses on using it in R, but the first few chapters are really good for talking about the basics of spatial data and some of the fundamentals of it as well. That's probably where I'd recommend starting. Otherwise, some YouTube videos or yeah, the GIS Stack Exchange is a good place to start as well. No worries, you're welcome. Or there are some consultancies if you've got an organizational budget for this, but I'm aware that's often a big ask. Or Esri, who provide ArcGIS Online, also provides some good training for charities if you sign up. So if you're looking at investing in spatial data in the long run, that's worth looking at. Map School, I've not seen this. What's going on at Map School then? Oh, cool. Okay, so this looks like some basics. Yeah, good. Yeah, good starting point. Thanks for that. Thanks for that, Duncan. That looks like a good option as well. So I did have a slide originally about raster and vector, but I got rid of it because 99% of stuff's vector these days, unless you're an environmental charity, in which case you already know about raster formats. So anyone got any good examples of mapping their own data that they're proud of that they want to share? I'd be really interested to see it if that's the case, or you can send me an email or message me on Twitter or something like that. And Data Collective, if you're interested in getting organizational buy-in to invest in spatial data, have a chat with some of the people from the Data Collective, because I know there are some people in there that have gone through the same struggles. And it's often one of these things that people think, yeah, sounds cool, but they need to be able to see it to actually buy into it. So in that case, things like OCSI's local insight free trial is a really good option. The free trial lasts for a little while, and you can just demonstrate the power of sort of mapping your data really nicely there. Just published car-free megacities. Cool. I'll have a look at that. Duncan, I don't think we met, but from the looks of it, we probably should have. So I'll have a look at you on Twitter and stuff and follow up afterwards. That sounds good. Mapping green space and space taken up by cars in city. Nice. I'll open that and have a look later. I used RNIB's sight loss data set to map against London boroughs to see where there are highest rates of blind and partially sighted people. But we found 50% of our donors aren't local anymore. This needs to impact the communication strategy. Interesting. So, oh, sorry, these different people. Okay, Lynn, that's a really nice use. Were you successful in using that sort of direct your grant funding or apply for more funding? That sounds like a really nice case use. And if you've not told RNIB about that, then I appreciate an email, because for them, it builds the case for maintaining these types of data sets. Started to map the location of our donors. We are a very local charity. We found 50% of our donors aren't local anymore. Yeah, really interesting. So there's a church in Birmingham who maps their data every year. And they found that over the years, as families have got bigger, basically, they've moved all over the city, and that in turn has changed their communication strategy. So something like that, Herbert, you could use Google My Maps for really easily, just to show the distribution of where your donors are. And of course, you can keep that map internal, so you don't have to share that if you want to keep that data private. But yeah, thank you for those both. They're really great uses. And if people are struggling with or worried about anonymization of their data, you can always group it under a particular sort of spatial area. So you can sort it by lower super output area or ward. And again, that's where David Kane's find that postcode comes in handy, because you can add the spatial data as an extra column. You can append it on the side. But yeah, there are lots of ways of getting around not showing individual postcodes, particularly if people are in rural areas. It could be then quite easy to identify who people are, I guess. Yeah, I've seen more and more people use Tableau these days, which is really interesting, in part because other parts of the organization, like fundraising, have a Tableau license, and let other people get in on the action. So there are some great online mapping examples of charities using Tableau. So Guy's and St Thomas Health Foundation, they've just started a new arm, but Guy's and St Thomas Foundation have been using Tableau for a while. So if you just Google Guy's and St Thomas Tableau, I'm sure you'll find it. Some great examples on there of what can be done with mapping spatial data. Any questions or examples? Like I said, I'm around for a bit more, and you can send me an email if not. It's great to see people really interested in this. That I presented at the 2008 Data for Good conference in Birmingham. I think our room was probably about half the size of the amount of people that we had on this session. So it's great to see interest in it grow, and people like Catalyst get involved in funding tools like Community Lens. Spatial data isn't always the answer for everything, but it can often provide sort of a really nice visual tool just to get people engaged with, just to start conversations and build relationships over, even if the map itself isn't actually that amazing, to be honest. So you can use it at different things. Yeah, go enjoy your beans on toast. Feels a bit sad that we can't all go for coffee and carry on chatting about maps, but such is COVID world, isn't it? So maybe at next year's conference, we can have a mapping subgroup or something like that. Would be good, wouldn't it? Kai Lockwood. Kai, if you're there, I'd be interested to see if you've used spatial data in your food bank work at all. Thanks, Lynn. Have a good afternoon yourself. Thank you for coming. Glad you enjoyed it. Thanks for engaging. It's really good.